This reaction video, sponsored by Nationwide Industries, but Nationwide Industries is more than just a sponsor. I legitimately enjoy doing business with them, both with the Cornerstone 2 hinges and the Triton latch that we use on our pool gates, or on their full line of chain link hardware. They're great people to work with. I appreciate them a lot. If you're looking for a supplier, you should check them out too. All right, guys, today's video is titled 6 Mistakes to Avoid Building Fence by Arms Family Homestead. Seems like a solid channel. You guys should check it out. If you'd like to watch the original video in its entirety, we'll also link that in the description below.
Proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance.
Sounds right. Sounds right.
In today's video, I'm going to give you 6 common mistakes that people make when building a fence. What is it, Bear? These dogs are crazy today. So for tip number 1, we might as well start with the ground up, and that is the foundation of your fence.
All right, so it looks like we're talking about agricultural fence here, which I'm glad we're watching this. I don't do a ton of ag fence, so it's always good to learn a thing or two about something that you're not necessarily great at, or you don't do a lot of.
Then you've got to have a good foundation, and that on a fence is corner post or stretch post or gate post, line post, whatever you want to call them. But basically the post that the end of your fence is going to be tied onto. The biggest mistake people make is they either undersize the post or they don't go deep enough when they dig their holes.
Yeah, I agree on this. I haven't seen undersized posts so much in our sectors of fencing, but shallow set posts are a real problem because a lot of times the clients aren't home when these fences are being built. So an unsavory character might think that they can get away with setting those posts a little bit shallower, or they hit rock that they think they can't get through or whatever. Problem is, frost heave is a real thing, and just structural stability of the fence is significantly decreased by setting shallow.
These posts were dug.
That's a groundhog. We've used those in the past. Pretty neat little system. Technically, it's a tow behind. It comes with like a hitch attachment that you can put on the front and tow that thing behind. Wouldn't recommend it. I'd rather put it in. We would rather put it in the back of the truck or on a trailer. Look at that soil, huh? Looks like they've got some really nice digging there.
In the ground with an auger and set in concrete. We dig them at a minimum of 36 inches. Now there's a second school of thought that says you can drive those posts into the ground. You're gonna have to go really deep, like say 4 or 5 feet.
I'd have to double check. I believe ASTM standards are 6 inches deeper than a concrete set post. So if ASTM was 30 inch to be set, then it'd be 36 inch on a driven post. Now, you can never have too much, I don't think. So if you were to drive that post 4 or 5 foot in the ground, you would have plenty of posts in the ground for it. You have plenty of support.
But a lot of people will go too small on their corner posts, and I'll show you some things that happen here. So sometimes you do go with the right size post, you just don't go wide enough. And here's an example of when corner posts are put in and there wasn't enough distance in between the 2 posts there. So as you can see, that fence doesn't have a very wide H-brace. So what happened, as you can tell, I mean, I'm kind of standing straight, but you can see over the years, that corner post has pulled. The tension on the fence has pulled it that direction. 2 things, in my opinion. There's just an H-brace here. There probably should have been another kicker come down at a horizontal angle to the ground. This H is only about 4 feet wide. Probably should have been 7 or 8 feet to the second post, and then another 7 or 8 feet. You put another post in the ground and you do your diagonal, and I think that would have held. And then sometimes, for whatever reason, people decide to just use 1 post. Now I've seen guys build a fence and use like a great big wooden telephone pole. I mean, a big post. Now that might hold, but something like this example I'm going to show you over here. So this is a perfect example of what happens when you try to build a fence and you just use 1 post for a stretch post.
Now see, we can get away with single terminal posts in like residential and commercial, in chain link in general, because you've got the top rail that's there providing support. Now, actually, in a lot of commercial applications, you'll still see an H-brace or a diagonal brace used. So sometimes in the chain link world, we'll see, typically, at least in Missouri, you see it with the state highway department. They don't want the top rail. They want a top smooth wire, and so then you'll really have to brace it correctly. Interesting to see the agricultural industry, how they tackle this as far as bracing that post upright.
Tip number 2 has to do with choosing the right kind of wire for your fence. You need to know ahead of time what you may be putting inside this fence. Are you going to be trying to keep bear in? Because he's a hard one to keep in. No, for real though, are you going to be having sheep and goats, or are you looking at cattle? You need to know ahead of time. What? Come on, buddy, I'm trying to talk. You need to plan ahead of time. So with this pen that we just recently built here, I used sheep and goat wire with 1 strand of barbed wire on the bottom, 1 strand of barbed wire on the top, and the wire itself is 4x4 square, 4x4 inch squares. And this will pretty much hold any livestock I want to put in it. Sheep, goats, a horse, donkeys, cows. I could probably hold a chicken if I wanted it to. Maybe not baby chicks, but you get the point. Third common mistake I see is not getting your fence line straight. There are a lot of people that'll build a fence, and instead of setting a corner post anywhere or setting a stretch post where the fence may need to make a curve. I know not every fence line is going to be perfectly straight, but I do know this. In physics, I learned that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. And I'm not talking about people that put a big bow in their fence. That's obviously gonna fail. But sometimes you'll see they get their fence a little bit crooked and then the whole fence will lean. Well, usually what's causing the fence to lean is it's not straight. It's not a straight line between the 2 points. They drove all their posts and they didn't pull a perfectly straight line before they did.
And we'll see this a lot in chain link as well. A contractor without the right training, or maybe just wanting to save on terminal posts, might not put a terminal post in where a dog leg occurs. They'll try to bend it past line posts. And what he's talking about, we see that, again, we see it in chain link fence, even with a top rail for support. You're not saving yourself a lot of money by not putting in terminal posts. At the end of the day, the end result being it's going to be a improperly installed fence anyway. And to his point, that chain link fence will start pulling itself over if it's properly tensioned.
Next time you're out driving around, just look at all the fences along the line or along the side of the roads. Sometimes you'll see one that's really leaning, and a lot of times people think that's because cows or horses are pushing on it. That's not always the case. Now, they can cause one to lean, but most of the time it's because people put up a fence, they pulled it tight, and that wire found the shortest distance between the 2 points, and the whole fence is trying to lean on them. So make sure you get a nice straight line. It just looks pretty too when you get a good straight fence, but make sure you get a nice straight line if you want your fence to stay standing perfectly straight.
Now, that was a nice tip he showed. He didn't really call it out, but so he had said he had barbed wire on the top and on the bottom. So he had already run his 2 stretch posts or corner posts, whatever you'd like to call them, and his bottom run of barbed wire, or we would use tension wire, and use that as a guide as to where all those posts are going to be installed. I learned that tip from a solar farm guy, a guy that builds a massive amount of solar farm fence, to run that bottom smooth wire. So he was driving all of his corners. You drive your corners, wrap your bottom wire, and that's going to tell you exactly where your line posts need to be. Nice little tip.
Number 4 on the list may be a little bit controversial, and I think a lot of people may disagree with me on this, but in my opinion, one common mistake that I see people make is buying cheap material when they build a fence. You have to look at a fence. There's a good chance you're going to be on this property a long time. You want your livestock to stay in. You want your livestock to stay safe. Don't cheap out on the materials. Go out and buy good quality fencing materials.
We see this a lot, at least in our local area. There are no large wholesalers in our city here in Springfield. They're typically all 3 hours away, either St. Louis, Kansas City, or Tulsa. And so therefore some fence contractors will then go to a big box store to pick up material there, and they'll save a little bit of money on it. But in the end, the customer is really the one left holding the bag on that one, because it will fail faster, and it's just lower quality material. And ultimately, the customer is likely not getting what they think they paid for. So spending the extra money to use quality material, contractor quality. Sometimes that word gets used in a misleading type way, but you guys get what I'm talking about. Using quality material, investing in quality material helps your customer. They get what they think they're paying for, but also it helps you and your reputation when that fence doesn't fail 4 or 5 years down the road.
Over the years, I've seen people buy really cheap wire, whether it be barbed wire or sheep and goat wire, but really light gauge wire that they can't really stretch very tight. And you come out here and you end up with this. This is not a tight fence, but I've seen people go out and buy cheap material, stretch it, and it looks like this a week later. Do it right. Spend the money the first time, or you'll be spending the money 2 or 3 more times repairing that thing in the future.
That's a fair point too. The money that you think you're saving by using lower quality material, you'll end up, over the life of the fence, you'll end up paying significantly more for it anyway. You could actually save money for the life of the fence by paying a little bit more up front for quality.
And we kind of hit on tip number 5 in the last point, and that was wire tightness, getting your wire super tight. It's very important to take the stretch, take the slack out of that barbed wire or horse wire, whatever kind of wire it is. If it's single strand, 2-strand wire that's woven like barbed wire is, if you just pull it tight once, over time it's gonna sag. It'll sag, I promise you. But you have to go out in the middle of your fence line and walk it back while you still have it on your come along or whatever you're using to stretch your fence. Go pull that wire, just walk backwards with it away from the fence line. And when you let it go and walk back up, you'll see that where it was up here, it's now sagging. You took a lot of the stretch out of it. It's very important to take the stretch out of barbed wire. And my last tip for today, tip number 6, has to do with planning. You wouldn't build a house without a plan. You wouldn't build a road without a plan. If you're gonna be building fence on your property, in my opinion, it's very important to have a plan. So you're gonna wanna know, first off, you're gonna know where all your underground utilities are. Are there water lines, electric lines? You need to call and schedule someone to come out and mark all of your utility lines, because that's one of those things that could cost you your life if you hit an electric line. So make sure you do that first. Second is planning, like simple things like gates. Plan out ahead of time. If you're building a pen, there's gonna be 2 or 3 sides, and to connect to your barn, whatever it is, 4 sides, put more gates in there than you'll think you need.
That's a fair point, even on the residential commercial side. So the homeowner, the property owner, commercial, whatever, they typically don't put in enough gates. They say, well, I only need to get in and out, so I just need 1 gate over here on this side of the house or property or whatever. And typically when we're doing an on-site evaluation with them, or the final measurements with them, we'll say, now, so if you're on the opposite side of the house and say you're mowing, to get from the backyard to the front yard, now you've got to go all the way around, whereas if there were a gate here, you could just go through the gate. Do you want a gate here maybe? I mean, if you think you might want to, now is the time. It is less expensive to put it in now than it will be for a separate trip later. Put in more gates than you think you need. I mean, it saves you massive amounts of headache later, and saves you money if you're putting it in, planning to put it in before that fence actually goes in.
Sometimes people build a fence and they go, dadgummit, I wish I had a gate there. Well, after the fence is built, it's too late. So
not necessarily too late. It's just going to be incredibly more difficult to get it in there. You're going to have to, of course, obviously set new posts, but you're going to have to break the fence. You're going to have to re-stretch a fence. It gets a lot more complicated. It's not impossible, but I think his point is, if there's any thought in your mind you might want a gate there, go ahead and put one. And
then when it comes to gates, make sure you plant them wide enough. I've seen people build fences and put a gate in. They'll put an 8-foot gate, an 8-foot wide gate. Well, then a few years down the road, they need to get their tractor inside to put out hay, or they need to get their pickup truck inside to load up a load of firewood, and their gate's not big enough.
Residential, we see this a lot, because they say, I want a 5-foot gate. They don't tell you why, but I want a 5-foot wide gate. No problem. Put them in a 5-foot gate, a 60-inch opening, and then realize it's because they have a 60-inch cut mower. That doesn't work. If the moon and stars align perfectly, that thing might get through fine. But that 60-inch doesn't take into account the chute that's going to spread out your clippings, and it doesn't account, and that's only accounts for if it hits it totally square, not out of line at all. So typically we'll go ahead and ask, what's the motivation for the 5-foot gate? Is it a 60-inch mower? Well, then let's talk about putting you in a 6-foot gate, because you're going to want a little bit of margin of error on both sides. So build more gates than you think you're going to need, and build them larger than you think you're going to need them.
So plan out where your gates are going to go. Plan out where your utilities are. Plan out what type of livestock you're gonna have in there. Plan, over-plan. Think about this stuff ahead of time.
A lot of mistakes I see made when building fence are simply because whoever was building it got in a hurry. And they skipped the planning phase, and they thought that they would just figure it out as they went. To his point, if you plan out your project, you can try to think through these eventualities, think through the options, and, what might you use it for, that sort of thing. Like I said, most of the mistakes I see made in fence are made because they just failed to properly plan.
When I was growing up, my dad always said, proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance. People don't plan it out. They just go buy some material and throw up a fence, and then a year later they're like, dadgummit, why didn't I put up this kind of fence? Or dadgummit, why didn't I put this fence over here? Or how about this? They didn't figure out where their property line was, and they're 10 feet across the property line onto their neighbor's property when the next neighbor sells their property, and it gets surveyed, and they go, holy cow, our fence isn't in the right spot. We're 10 feet off from where it should be. So plan ahead of time. Remember that.
Surveys are huge. And if there's ever any question, this is residential, commercial, ag, whatever. If there's ever a question, you spend the time and the money and the effort to figure out exactly where those property pins are. Now, a lot of times it doesn't require a full-blown survey. A lot of times the surveyors will simply come and restake the existing property pins. A little bit less expensive. Same end result. You know exactly where your corners are. You don't get the survey report, the plat map, any of that. But you definitely want to know exactly where those corners are, irregardless of what type of fence you're putting in.
Proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance. Guys, that's all I've got for today. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.
Guys, let me know about these 6 tips. What do you think? Would you recommend something differently, or would you explain a little bit differently? Let me know in the comments below. Always love interacting with you guys there. Until next time, I'm Joe Everest, the fence expert, reminding you that good fences make good neighbors.